Right, let us start with questions to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Allan Dorans.
Here, here.
This is absolutely, totally unfair to the member. Allan Dorans.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Good afternoon. Question 1, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with your permission, I'd like to answer this question with numbers 19 and 21. The OBR expect UK living standards to grow in all years of the forecast period.
Mr Speaker, the Building Societies Association described the housing market as broken, with first-time buyers facing the toughest housing conditions in 70 years to buy a home. With the IMF projecting interest rates to be around 5% for the remainder of the year, and the Government rejecting the SNP's call to reinstate mortgage interest relief, does the Chancellor anticipate any relief for first-time buyers in the near future?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman will know that the Bank of England is independent, but the good news is that the OBR expect inflation rates to fall to near target in the very near future.
Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To relieve bad debt, the Warm This Winter campaign has found that households will have to pay an additional £1.3 billion to help energy companies recover bad energy debt. What assurance can the Minister give that this extra charge will be passed on to indebted customers to alleviate their debt burden, rather than just being allowed to alleviate debt for energy companies?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, it is good news that energy prices are set to fall, and the Honourable Lady will know that the Chancellor abolished the surcharge in one of his first budgets.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The UK is set to have the highest level of inflation in the G7 and the lowest rate of growth in the entire OECD in 2025. And bizarrely, the Chancellor claimed ludicrously that the Tories are winning the war on inflation. With GDP per capita continuing to fall as part of the longest unbroken decline since records began, who does the Minister think in the real world really believes that this plan is working and that the cost of living crisis is easing?
Yeah.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, it is very important to note that inflation has more than halved since the Prime Minister took place. It's now at 3.2%. This will have a material impact on the cost of living pressures on households. In addition, support this year includes cutting national insurance rates across the UK, raising the local housing allowance, benefits up by 6.7%, national living wage up by 9.8%, and pensions up by 8.5%. We are on the side of British people.
Caroline Dinenage.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As you know, it isn't solely households who are facing increased cost pressures. Businesses across our communities are as well, particularly small music venues that are shutting at the rate of 2 a week. So ahead of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee's inquiry into this, what thought has the Minister given to a VAT cut for the grassroots music venues across our constituencies?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I know this is something that the Honourable Lady cares very deeply about. I know she has a report coming out in a few weeks, and I look forward to reading that then.
Villiers.
Mr Speaker, it is crucial to bring down inflation and ensure that we create the right climate for reductions in interest rates and further tax cuts. Will she agree that this is the best way to tackle the cost of living pressures?
Minister.
As ever, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last financial year, Buckinghamshire Council supported 4,186 people struggling with the cost of living as part of the £4.8 million of funding from the Household Support Fund. Their Helping Hand scheme continues with £2.4 million through to this September. So will my right friend agree with me that Buckinghamshire households that are struggling with the house of living should get in touch with Buckinghamshire Council to get the help and support they need from the Helping Hand scheme funded by this government?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend is completely correct. The Household Support Fund has done so much to help people struggling with the cost of living. I commend the way that Buckinghamshire Council have handed out the money and continue to do so throughout the year.
SNP spokesperson Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Westminster's cost of living crisis disproportionately affects those on low incomes, young people and people living in rural areas with limited travel options. One example is the soaring cost of car insurance, inexplicably higher in Scotland than most other parts of the UK. A 22-year-old with 5 years driving experience might expect their premiums to go down, yet they're paying on average £667 more than when they passed at their test at age 17. So why is the UK government doing absolutely nothing to hold insurance companies to account?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can't comment on the specifics of car insurance companies, but what I can say is that for people struggling with the cost of living, in whatever form it comes through, I would note the working age benefits are going up by 6.7% this year.
Drew Hendry.
Clearly, the Minister has paid no attention to this at all. This is exceptional to the UK. Whilst prices for car insurance have more than doubled in the UK over the same period, they've only gone up 18% across the EU. Car insurance has gone down by 20% in independent Ireland. So what is the reason? Is it Brexit? Is it shameless profiteering? Or has, as we suspect, Westminster just given up on people in the cost of living crisis?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think we've heard enough from the Brexit zombies on the other side of the table. You know, we have a situation... if the honourable gentleman would just like to listen, I would like to point out that the national living wage is up by 9.8% this year, which helps with exactly the type of cost that the honourable gentleman is talking about.
Jim McMahon.
Number 2, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. The government acknowledges the vital contribution cooperatives make to the economy. In the latest Cooperative and Mutual Economy Report 2023, it found that cooperatives generated a combined annual turnover of £41 billion, a 3.7% increase from 2022 levels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister outlines there, cooperatives are worth £41 billion to the UK economy. But more than that, they are 10% more productive on average, they're twice as likely to survive the first 5 years of trading, and they have higher rates of investment than other private businesses. So what more can the government do to encourage more cooperatives to thrive? And does he believe, like I do, that the development of cooperative development agencies in every region has to be part of that?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point, and I note his long interest in the cooperative sector and the work that he does on it. What's the government doing? Two things specifically. First of all, the government has recently taken further steps by backing the Cooperatives, Mutuals and Friendly Societies Act 2023 and commissioning the Law Commission to review the Cooperative and Community Benefit Societies Act 2014 to make sure that cooperatives can do as much as possible to benefit the wider economy.
Thank you
very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Last year, Rotherham Council spent last 2 years spent £240,000 promoting cooperatives and employee ownership. Does he agree with me that this huge amount of money should be better spent on fixing potholes, opening youth clubs, rather than an ideological viewpoint which has no measurable outcome to the people of Rotherham?
Minister.
I don't want to comment specifically on Rotherham, but what I will say to the honourable gentleman and to the House is that the best way of promoting cooperatives is indeed allowing them to thrive as best they can, supporting the members to do what they do best, which is support their local economies, not necessarily through huge amounts of public subsidy, but to do what the cooperative movement was founded to do, support the local economies and local people.
Karen McCarthy.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to answer this question with question number 17. Thanks to the combination of national insurance cuts and above-inflation increases to thresholds since 2010, an average worker on £35,400 this year will pay over £1,500 less in personal taxes than they otherwise would have done. And in addition, maintaining fuel duty rates, for example, represents a further £13 billion benefit to households over the 3 years since its introduction.
McCarthy.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but he will know that people are still really struggling with the cost of living crisis. And one of the ways the government could help would be to seek a bespoke veterinary agreement with the EU, which would not only cut costs for businesses, but would stop food prices rising even more. A future Labour government would do this, so why won't the government commit to it?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady is correct in her first comment. We recognise, everybody recognises in this House, the extreme challenges of the cost of living challenges over the last few years, precisely why the government's adopted the strategy we've had of laser focus on inflation and, combined with that, of course, tax cuts, national insurance cuts recently. We have a very constructive and positive relationship with the EU and are always engaging with them on a variety of matters.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the run-up to last week's elections, the Prime Minister never stopped talking about national insurance cuts, and the Minister's doing it again today. But the government has been giving with one hand and taking away with the other. That's right. Does the Minister recognise that, according to the Resolution Foundation, the combined impact of all this government's tax changes leaves workers earning less than £26,000 a year worse off? And will he apologise to workers in South Yorkshire, whose average earnings are close to that level, for misrepresenting their position?
Minister.
Of course, we recognise the challenges of those on the lowest incomes in the UK, precisely why we've been adopting a whole bunch of other measures, including housing allowance and other measures. But if the Honourable Gentleman is so opposed by the national insurance cuts we introduced, why is it that the Leader of Opposition supported them?
The Manchester congratulations on the engagement of the weekend, not crossing the floor, I understand. Come on.
Most definitely not. Most definitely not. Mr. Speaker, it's just been said that there is a real challenge to the cost of living, and that is absolutely correct. And one key part of that is with regards to the war in Ukraine, and with regards to the real challenges on the energy supply for the United Kingdom. And that's a former minister who applied sanctions on Russia and looked at the oil price cap. We need to make sure that what happens in Ukraine is offset with regards to actions that Russia is accountable for and the cost of living. What I mean by that is the US has introduced seizing Russian assets to pay for reconstruction of Ukraine, and therefore the UK should do that, and that would help the burden on the UK economy and taxpayer.
I think the tax policy will answer that. Thank you, Minister.
Always a pleasure to see my honourable friend in his place in the House. He's raising a whole variety of really important issues, and I think we'll recognise that that is precisely why we work across government with multiple departments involved, in particular as it relates to sanctions, because the impact of the invasion of Ukraine has been incredible around the world, not just in the UK. But as I said, I think that everybody in this House should welcome the fact that because of the actions this government has taken, of course the Bank of England and other measures, inflation is now falling and soon to hit target.
Shadow Minister James Murray.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives' decisions in this Parliament mean the average family will face a tax bill that is £870 a year higher. Pensioner taxpayers will pay £960 a year more. To quote the Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, this remains a Parliament of record tax rises. Higher taxes, squeezed living standards and weaker public services. Does the Minister understand why the country has lost confidence in the Conservatives when that is their legacy?
There are many people in this country who will remember the abysmal performance economically of the last Labour government, when the tax-free allowance, for example, was £6,475. It's now £12,570. Over 1.5 million people have been taken out of paying income tax altogether. We have a focus on this side. Now the economy is turning. We want to put more money back into people's pockets. That's exactly what we are doing with the national insurance cuts and other measures, and I'm surprised the Honourable Gentleman doesn't welcome that.
John Penrose.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Improving public sector productivity is a major focus for this government, which is why I announced £4.2 billion of funding to make our public services more efficient in the budget.
Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, as a former health secretary, my right honourable friend will know how evidence-based medicine transformed health productivity, systematically cutting out ineffectual treatments and replacing them with ones that worked better. Using the evaluation task force and the What Works centres to do the same for other public services, from back-to-work programmes to prisoner rehabilitation or early interventions for supported families, those could be the productivity-improving silver bullet that he needs. Can I urge him to beat a path to their door?
Chancellor.
Well, he's right to talk about the What Works programme, which has delivered over 500 trials and is recognised internationally. And he talked about the NHS. There are some very good examples in the NHS of what actually is working, including the NHS app, which is now used by 75% of NHS patients, including 17,000 over 90s. So let no one assume that older people are not internet savvy.
Clive Efford.
Mr Speaker, £8.7 billion was wasted on defective PPE during the COVID crisis, much of it paid to people associated with the Conservative Party. You didn't have to be a Conservative Party member to benefit from the fast track, but it didn't help. So what was the Chancellor doing to get public money back from those people who sold this defective equipment to the NHS? And doesn't it just show that we can't trust the Tories with public money?
Chancellor the Exchequer.
What it shows is that we took very difficult decisions in the pandemic in order to speed up access to PPE for frontline workers who were literally dying at the time. But there should be no hiding place whatsoever for anyone who commits fraud on taxpayers, which is why there have been over 100 arrests.
So the Minister Dorans-Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The only productivity improvement we've seen from this government is the awarding of wasteful contracts. On top of all of the PPE waste that my honourable friend has just referred to, there is still £1 billion worth of unresolved PPE contracts that this government awarded which have not been delivered on. But only one of them, PPE MedPro, is facing legal action. Why is the government not taking legal action on the other companies that have not delivered on their contract to the members of the public?
Chancellor.
Let me be clear. There is absolutely no hiding place for anyone, whether they are connected to the Conservative Party, the Labour Party or any other party. If they have defrauded the taxpayer, we will go after them.
I thank the Chancellor for his answer. He says he's making progress and that there's no hiding place, but this money belongs to our public services. The government knows that these contracts haven't delivered, but they won't reveal the names of the companies and the contracts that have not delivered. If there's no hiding place, why would the Chancellor not name them today?
Chancellor.
Because we are taking legal action, and as he knows full well, when you're taking legal action, that is information that belongs to the police.
Thank you, through.
Question number 6.
Front bench. Oh, Chancellor.
The spring budget delivered personal tax cuts, including to national insurance, for 29 million workers. I mean, someone on an average salary has the lowest effective personal tax rate since 1975 and the lowest effective tax rate of any G7 country.
Thank you, through.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Whilst responsible tax cuts such as the £900 reduction in national insurance contributions are completely welcome, would my right honourable friend update the House on when we can expect VAT to be abolished on high-factor sunscreen, a measure which would not only help protect more people from one of the leading causes of preventable cancer, but also could save the NHS approximately £55 million?
Chancellor.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and we've talked about this issue on many occasions. She will know that high-factor sunscreen on NHS prescriptions is on the NHS prescriptions for certain conditions, and it is VAT-free when dispensed by a chemist. I should say to her, with my Chancellor hat on, that we have had £50 billion of requests for VAT relief since Brexit. It's great to have the freedom to make those changes, but we also have to be honest about the trade-offs. And in particular, we want to make sure that if we do any of these reliefs, the benefits are actually fed through to consumers.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This weekend I spoke to a constituent who has invested heavily in a restaurant in my constituency over the last 15 years. He was in desperation because his business, like 2 other businesses which were very close in the town, is being crushed by VAT, by business rates, by increases in corporate taxes, and he finds that he can no longer sustain a business which has become the love of his life. Does the Chancellor realise that the tax burden which he's imposing on small and medium-sized businesses is crushing this economy?
What I would say to the Honourable Gentleman is we are doing everything we can to support small businesses, and businesses like the one he mentions have received now for 2 years in a row a 75% discount on their business rates. That's a massive leg up for businesses who are recovering from the pandemic. And we've made sure that any increases in corporation tax only apply to larger businesses. But there is only one major party in British politics that wants to bring down the tax burden for businesses, and it's the Conservative Party.
Chris Loader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question 7.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2020, the Treasury undertook a comprehensive review of the Green Book and how it's used in practice and made several changes as a result. We regularly update the Green Book to ensure it remains fit for purpose, and we published a further technical update in 2022.
Chris Loader.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for her kind answer? She will know that representing a rural constituency such as Dorset in the southwest of England, it is important to me and to my colleagues in the region to make sure that the government takes due consideration for the southwest when it comes to allocating funds and investment opportunities to it. We have typically seen the Green Book has not adequately allocated funds in favour of Dorset and neighbouring counties, and I wondered what steps that my right honourable friend will take to help make sure that we correct this issue.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is, as ever, a brilliant advocate for his local area. I note that West Dorset is getting £4.4 million from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The wider Dorset area is benefiting from a range of other significant investments, including the £9.7 million from the Future High Streets Fund. But I'm happy to meet the honourable gentleman to discuss this matter further.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like the honourable gentleman for West Dorset, I also represent a rural constituency, and for me it's Strangford, which is the reason why I'm here and the reason why I want to represent it as well. What steps will the Minister take to ensure that all updates and volumes in relation to the Green Book apply to Northern Ireland and indeed other areas across this great nation? Thank you.
Minister.
The honourable gentleman raises an excellent point, and it's one that I'll be discussing with the Northern Ireland Finance Minister in a couple of weeks' time.
Sim Crown.
Number 8, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses drive our economy and we support them to thrive using levers across government, whether that's through our small business rates relief, by increasing the VAT registration threshold, or providing reliefs such as the annual investment allowance.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In England, many small businesses receive 75% reduction in business rates thanks to action by this Conservative government. In Wales, the Labour administration has cut this level of support to 40%, meaning that excellent hospitality businesses like Martha's Vineyard in my constituency have to find thousands of pounds more in tax. Does the Minister agree with me that this is not the way to support the tourism and hospitality sector at a really challenging time? And also, it is an example of the Labour Party saying one thing here at Westminster and doing another thing when they're in government.
Well, my right honourable right that at the autumn statement the government extended retail, hospitality and leisure relief in England to cut tax essentially for 230,000 businesses, a tax cut worth £2.5 billion. I can tell him that the Barnet formula allows the Welsh Labour government to offer similar relief to Welsh businesses, but it is disappointing, if not surprising, they've chosen not to do that.
Morgan.
Speaker, I visited Casey Jones Garage in Oswald Street on Friday, which is a medium-sized business and very long-standing in North Shropshire. One of the many challenges they're facing, along with astronomical energy bills and a shortage of skilled labour, is the business rates that they need to pay, because they must have a presence on the high street for people to take their cars to. Will the Minister consider a fundamental reform of business rates so that those businesses that need a high street presence can manage to continue to exist in the future, because they are under huge pressure at the moment?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I was just saying, we have 75% relief for most high street businesses, but I would encourage you to look at the package as a whole. We've also increased the VAT threshold, bringing 28,000 businesses like the one she describes out of paying any VAT at all, as well as a range of other measures.
Andrew Jenkins.
Of the cherished independent shops and restaurants that line the streets of Morley, serving the lifeblood of our community, can I ask the Minister what bold measures is the Department taking to counter the oppressive weight of skyrocketing business rates imposed by the financially reckless Labour-led Leeds City Council in order to safeguard the very heart of our local economy?
Minister.
Well, she's a great champion of all businesses in Morley and across Leeds, and I know that because I've seen it firsthand. I would point out to her as well that this government has reduced taxation on small businesses. We've increased the VAT threshold. We've got a 75% rate relief for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses, as she alluded to. But it is this Conservative government that is on the side of hardworking people and businesses across Morley and around the country.
We're Hobbs.
Mr. Speaker. In the last decade, more than one music venue closed every week, including Moles in Bath. This has resulted in the loss of 4,000 jobs, 1,400 and 250,000 events, over 190,000 performance opportunities, £9 million of income for musicians, and 59 million in lost direct economic activity. What is the government doing to support small music venues?
Minister.
Well, we're doing a lot, Mr. Speaker. We're increasing the VAT threshold. We've got a rates relief package. The recent spring budget was one of the biggest packages supporting our cultural industries that this country has ever seen. I would encourage her to look at that.
Mr. West.
Question 10, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, I do apologise. Shadow Minister Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2022, almost 400 communities have lost their local bank branch, which has had a devastating impact on local and small businesses. Despite witnessing the decline of the British High Street, the government has been dragging its feet on rolling out banking hubs which would help local and small businesses. So could I ask the Minister, will he finally back the Labour Party's plans to provide a banking hub in every community that needs one?
Well, Mr. Speaker, banking hubs are driven by commercial organisations. Any area that loses bank branches is entitled to get a banking hub. Of course, we want to see more across the country, but we also have to recognise that banking has changed and the ways in which people bank has moved more towards digital. And so it is right that commercial organisations take commercial decisions.
Mr. West.
Question 10, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Apologies, Mr. Speaker. At spring budget, we built on the £15 billion of levelling up commitments made since 2019. We announced a trailblazer devolution deal for the North East Mayoral Combined Authority and a £400 million package, an extension to the long-term plan for towns.
Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Cross-Party Public Accounts Committee revealed that the government's levelling up funds were subject to a worrying lack of transparency, with rules for accessing funding changing while bids were still being assessed. Will the Minister therefore apologise to those 55 local authorities rejected for funding who were not told in advance that their applications had no chance of success?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the government that implemented £15 billion of support for communities outside of London and the South East. It's one of the reasons we've got median pay growth higher in every region outside of London and the South East. There is, of course, a robust methodology and criteria for selecting places for funding, and I encourage her to look at that criteria.
Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the establishment of the Darlington Economic Campus now having passed 750 employees, well on its way to over 1,500 roles in my constituency, what assessment has my honourable friend made of its contribution to the local economy, reducing inequalities and our levelling up agenda?
Minister.
Well, the Darlington Economic Campus is an important part of this government's operations. It's an important part of our government estate, but it's also important to the people of Darlington, not just the jobs that it has created. But this builds, of course, on the back of significant funding on my honourable friend's watch, £22 million town deal, £6 million part of the Shared Prosperity Fund, like I said, all on his watch, and one of the reasons why the people voted to elect Ben Houchin just the other day.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Regional inequality may be made worse by my constituents facing having to pay again for funeral plans after they were sold fake funeral plans by legacy funeral directors. Many simply can't afford to pay for those plans again, and instead of having the funeral that their families wanted for them, instead will only be able to have the free service being offered by the council. Does the Minister agree that the bank should offer more discretion when looking at victims of fraud, and will he meet with me to discuss this specific case further?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear of the circumstances which she describes. My honourable friend, the Economic Secretary, whose portfolio this sits, will be with her.
Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For many years, it's been coastal communities that have suffered economic inequalities, and we all know that the best way of changing that is to create the conditions for investment and the jobs that go with them. Despite the good work that the government have done, we still need more funding in areas such as Cleethorpes. Could the Minister outline what plans the government may have for bringing forward further schemes in the near future?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's right to acknowledge that funding has gone in. I completely appreciate the specific challenges that coastal communities face, but it's important to look at the package of measures to level up, not just the funding in things like the Shared Prosperity Fund, Levelling Up Fund and Towns Fund, but the devolution deals, the 13 devolution deals, 13 investment zones, 12 free ports. These are all packages and measures that will help areas like his, but I'll always keep his area in mind.
Blake Drummond.
Question number 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this with question 18. Over the last 2 years, cost of living support has totalled £96 billion, or an average of £3,400 per household. As a result, living standards, which were predicted to fall 2% last year, rose by nearly 1%, and we're on track to reach pre-pandemic living standards 2 years early.
Thank you. I welcome the support that the government has provided throughout COVID and the recent energy crisis for my constituents in Mearn Valley. Thank you. It's made a huge difference to people's domestic budgets. But now inflation is falling and the economy is improving, can we look forward to the government's continued support with a range of fiscal steps, including cutting taxes?
Chancellor.
We can absolutely do that, and I want to thank my honourable friend for pointing out that the biggest single thing we can do to help people with cost of living pressures is to bring down inflation. And that seems to be something that escaped the Shadow Chancellor this morning when she said it wasn't a big deal to get inflation down to its target. It is a very, very big deal for families facing a cost of living crisis. And she needs to know that inflation falls by design and not by accident.
Nadia Whitty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor can talk all he wants about inflation falling, but this is little comfort to my constituents who are still struggling to make ends meet.
That's right.
Even with the national insurance cut, annual post-tax earnings for the average family remain on course to be £380 lower at the start of 2025 than they were in 2021, a gap not predicted to close until 2029. This means yet more years of lost wage growth. So when will the government get serious about tackling the low-wage, insecure work that it has allowed to become the norm in this country?
Chancellor.
Could I suggest, if she really thinks that inflation falling from 11% to 3.2% is little comfort to her constituents, she might want to talk to a few more of them, because actually it is the biggest single thing that we can do to deal with cost of living pressures. And if she says, what are we doing to tackle the scourge of low pay, we've abolished it by raising the national living wage to £11.44 this year alone. For someone working full-time, that will mean an increase in their pay of £1,800.
Now come to Vicky Foxcroft.
Question 13, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 9th of June 2023, the Ministry of Justice launched a programme to raise awareness of the Mental Capacity Act 2005 in relation to how and when to access child trust funds. The first part of this programme is a new toolkit. The Ministry of Justice will continue this programme of work to raise awareness of how to obtain legal authority to access a child trust fund for which a court fee waiver is available.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only way for parents of young people without capacity to access their child trust fund is through a deputyship order. After consulting on the introduction of a mental capacity small payment scheme, which would allow a suitable person temporary access to release the funds, ministers opted not to legislate and instead introduce a toolkit, as said. Now, over 80,000 young people in England and Wales remain locked out of their child trust fund. So would the minister agree to go and look at this again?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I know how avidly she campaigns in this area. And the House should know, and you should know, Mr. Speaker, that I recently met the Right Honourable Member for Horsham and the Honourable Member for Sheffield Central to discuss this very issue. I'm very happy to meet with her as well, the member for Lewisham Deptford, to discuss it and see if we can get a solution here, because we do want to get this problem fixed.
Jeremy Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for the meeting to which he referred. Will he compliment financial institutions that are doing their utmost to make it easier for their disabled customers to access their child trust funds? And if his ministerial colleagues can find a way of making that easier across the board, would that have the support of him and his colleagues in the Treasury?
I thank my right honourable friend, and indeed, working with not just the Ministry for Justice but the Department for Work and Pensions is key in order to deliver this, but also working with the FCA to ensure that any financial institution that does the right thing, as he alludes to, doesn't somehow lose out or faces any regulatory issues. And that is indeed something which has the support of me and the Treasury, and will work across government to get this right.
Andrew Rossum.
Question 14, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you. As stated in the spring budget, the Government is considering the findings of the OBR review of VAT-free shopping alongside industry representations and broader data, and we continue to welcome further submissions and representations in response to those findings.
Mr. Speaker, if we look at Heathrow Airport, the United Kingdom's largest and busiest airport, their data shows that despite a near full recovery in passenger volumes post-lockdown, retail spend on affected goods is 32% below pre-pandemic levels. This figure is shocking. Heathrow Airport joined hundreds of businesses in calling on the government to reintroduce VAT, free shopping for tourists or similar incentives. So, will the Minister acknowledge the figures, listen to the industry and reinstate this popular policy as British business are demanding?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend will be pleased to know that I'll not only listen to the industry, I actually met with Heathrow just last week to hear their representations. The challenge here is the way that modelling and forecast and behavioural changes can be confidently assessed here, because there are estimates, the government estimate could suggest that a worldwide scheme could cost as much as £2.5 billion. The challenge is the so-called deadweight costs that could happen by subsidising spending that otherwise would exist anyway, versus the incremental benefit that we could get from new visitors coming into the UK. Of course, that is a behavioural change based on a tax change, and it is based on a variety of assumptions, and therefore the modelling and the assumptions underlying that do vary. But I am listening to all representations, Mr. Speaker.
Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Question 16, please.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The high-income child benefit charge threshold was raised to £60,000 on the 6th of April 2024. The point at which child benefit is fully withdrawn was also increased to £80,000, and the government estimates that this will take 170,000 families out of paying this charge in 2024-25. The government also plans to administer HICPIC on a household rather than individual basis by April 2026.
And the Wheeler.
I thank my right honourable friend for his reply. I have been contacted by many South Derbyshire parents caught in this unfair situation and wonder whether he can be even more precise about the savings that this will now mean to my affected constituents, please.
Minister.
Yes, I thank my right honourable friend for her comments and continual interest in this area as well. And in terms of the figures, the changes to the high-income child benefit charge mean that almost 500,000 hard-working families will gain an average of £1,260 towards the cost of raising their children in 2024-25. She'll recognise, of course, that is a meaningful difference to her constituents and those right across the country.
Now come to Topicals, Debbie Abrahams.
T1, Mr. Speaker, please.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Shadow Chancellor often likes to ask what's improved over the last 14 years, so I thought I would update the House on some of the latest statistics about the British economy. According to UN conference data, we have now overtaken France, the Netherlands and Japan to become the world's fourth largest exporter. The IMF say that we will grow faster over the next 6 years than France, Italy, Germany or Japan. And there are 200,000 more people in work compared to a year ago, which means that for every single day Conservative governments have been in office since 2010, there are 800 more people in work, many of whom will be very pleased that we are sticking to our plan.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And I think we should add to the Chancellor's statistics that we have the widest economic inequalities in Europe.
Yeah.
But my question, Mr. Speaker, is last week Professor Sir Michael Marmot published a new analysis showing significant increases in health inequalities, how long we live and how long we live in good health, and that's particularly the case between the north and the southeast of England. And of course this is driven by the economic inequalities I've just referred to. What assessment has the Chancellor undertaken on the loss in productivity directly as a result of this increase in health inequalities?
Chancellor? Well, if she's concerned about health, if she's concerned about economic inequalities, she'll be horrified to know they were even worse under the last Labour government, and they've been reduced under this government. But when it comes to health inequalities, it is this government that is phasing out smoking for everyone under the age of 14, one of the biggest single things in a generation that will reduce health inequalities and mean that poorer people live longer.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, the government's plans for a carbon border adjustment mechanism will create a level playing field for British manufacturers facing ungreen, high-carbon competition from abroad. But to comply with free trade rules, the CBAM must be an environmental measure rather than a revenue-raising trade protectionism. So will ministers confirm it will be fiscally neutral and that any net receipts will be returned to taxpayers, perhaps even by cutting fuel duty or green levies on energy bills?
Chancellor?
Sorry, I can confirm that we are very alive to cost of living pressures caused by fuel duty. In fact, we spent £6.4 billion freezing the duties on fuel, which will save the average motorist £50 over the coming year.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the budget, the Chancellor set out his intention to abolish national insurance, a £46 billion annual commitment with no clear plan as to how it would be paid for. One way to do it would be to merge income tax and national insurance. Does the Chancellor agree with analysis from the House of Commons Library, which shows merging these two would increase income tax by 8 pence in the pound?
Chancellor?
Which is why it is not our policy.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is strange because the day after the budget, the Chancellor told Sky News, and I quote, "You can end that unfairness of taxing work, you can merge income tax and national insurance." Now, the late Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, the Prime Minister's hero, warned that merging these two would, and I quote, "destroy the contributory principle and create many losers, especially among the elderly." In fact, a retired pensioner with an average occupational pension income of £198 a week would pay an additional £738 per year in tax. Isn't this why the Conservatives won't come clean? Because they are planning to pick pensioners' pockets to fund the abolition of national insurance.
If she listened to my comments carefully, and I don't always give her credit for that, she would know that our policy is to abolish employees' national insurance, and that means that we want to bring it down to zero. And if Labour's strategy, I'll just say this, if Labour's strategy is to win the election by frightening pensioners with fake news stories, then I would just say that Britain deserves better.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures came out with their framework last year. I would like to get an update on where we are with the ISSB approach, because just like it's been a huge success for companies and for the UK PLC to switch to TCFD, the carbon-related, it's vital for our planet that we also start to have TNFD standard right across the board.
Minister.
My right honourable friend is right that this is critical, and I'm pleased that the ISSB recently announced its intention to commence a research project on a nature thematic standard which considers carefully the TNFD's recommendations, and His Majesty's Government has established a formal mechanism to assess the ISSB standards for suitability for the UK in particular, broadly to make sure that both at a general sustainability standard and at a more specific climate sustainability standard, we're doing the right thing for the UK. The Government will publish an implementation update on sustainability disclosure requirements shortly to provide further information for industry. Watch this space, Mr. Speaker.
Jim Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've all seen it. The richest Prime Minister in history has spent the weekend telling the public that his plan is working. Well, it's not working for people in East Leeds whose taxes are going through the roof, while our public services are on their knees? Wouldn't a better plan to go after the tax dodgers rather than making ordinary people pay the price for this government's abject failures?
Minister.
I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I find the hypocrisy we hear astounding here. First of all, if the opposition objected to the national insurance cuts, why did the leader of the opposition say he supported them? And if the opposition is so keen on abolishing tax dodging, why did they not support our finance bill, which had measures in place to do just that? They didn't. They abstained on it.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bank of England has said that quantitative tightening is not an official part of its monetary policy targeting, yet it is at risk of costing fiscally £179 billion in losses underwritten by the Treasury. This is having a major effect on the fiscal situation of the country. Will His Majesty's Government encourage the Bank of England to hold these bonds to maturity, taking the carry cost rather than taking the hit of selling these bonds in the market and crystallising enormous loss?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend. In relation to the asset purchase facility and how that's worked over recent years, it is not His Majesty's Government or indeed the Treasury's intention to change the way in which this works with the Bank of England, but of course the Chancellor, as with all measures, keeps everything under close review.
Tory McArthur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the Bank of England, a typical family remortgaging this year will pay £240 a year more in mortgage payments. Does the Chancellor accept that even if the bank cuts rates, those homeowners will still be paying a penalty because this government crashed the economy?
Chancellor.
What I would say to those families is that the most damaging thing of all is to have inflation at 11%, and now we've reduced it to 3.2% and indeed expect it to go lower. Interest rates are starting to fall, and if she's worried about families in her constituency, she might be extremely worried by the Shadow Chancellor saying that if interest rates fall, it's somehow not a big deal. It really is.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I encourage my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, to revisit his decision to change the tax arrangements of furnished holiday lets in rural constituencies such as my own? These businesses make an important contribution to the local economy, provide jobs and enhance the tourism offering. Indeed, they stop depopulation rather than adding to it. And his decision is creating much concern amongst those who operate such businesses.
Minister.
Yes, of course, we recognise the important role that FHL's furnished holiday lets play in the ecosystem, the tourism ecosystem, right across the country. The problem was there was not a level playing field with long-term lets. So what we're doing is making sure that the benefits, and there will continue to be tax incentives and benefits from letting, but they need to be on par with short-term and long-term lets.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The consistently high price of fuel is driving drivers to dig deep and just to go about their daily business. With a rise of 10p reported since the start of the year and an average cost of filling a family car now £82.50, what efforts will this government make to help those in my rural constituency and across the United Kingdom who have little or no access to public transport and are dependent on their vehicles for work and family life?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's entirely right, which is why we've frozen fuel duty at the last fiscal event, a measure that cost £6.5 billion and will save the average driver £50.
Mr. Speaker, could I place on record my thanks to the Chancellor, where in his budget he devoted funds to Bournemouth for a police violence reduction unit. Would he agree with me that these units have a track record up and down the country of tackling knife crime, not just seeing extra police on the front line, but also engaging with schools to make sure that youths and students understand the folly of carrying a knife in the first place?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. Violence reduction units reduce crime and save lives. And I want to thank him because he was one of the first colleagues who brought to my attention ahead of the budget how impressive the results are from violence reduction units, as a result of which I was able to make it a national policy in the budget.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. Many of those campaigning for justice in the contaminated blood scandal will have been encouraged by the reporting in the Sunday Times over the weekend. Given that time is of the essence, can the Chancellor please indicate by which date these promises will be fulfilled?
Chancellor.
Well, I want to say to him that he is absolutely right to say the government is taking this issue very seriously, and we completely understand that speed is of the essence. And it is now only a matter of days before the report will be published, and we've always said that we want to publish our response very quickly after that, and I want to assure him we won't hang around.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The best way for a business to thrive and for customers to receive a great service is for companies to employ individuals on merit. Does the Chancellor agree with me that the recent overreach by the FCA and the PRA regarding their EDI policies is a step too far, and that it is inevitable that these policies will have a negative effect on all of us?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an important point, and I think it's important that the FCA bears in mind that its core focus on conduct and regulation should not be, they shouldn't be distracted from that by things that are more marginal for the people, for the businesses that they oversee. And I would urge them to take into account both the representations made by him and by industry in that regard and many others.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor recently claimed that £100,000 a year is not a huge salary. Does he realise how out of touch that sounds to families in my constituency who are working hard, earning much less than that, but are really struggling because they're paying 25% more for their weekly shop than they were 2 years ago, and whose mortgages soared after the Tories crashed the economy?
Chancellor.
Well, he knows perfectly well he's taken my comments out of context. But I'll tell you what's really out of touch. It's the Shadow Chancellor saying it's not a big deal if inflation falls.
Ian Levy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Cramlington, we have a world-leading pharmaceutical company, Organon, who employs 700 people. They produce medicine for the UK market as well as abroad, with a particular focus on women's health. Would my right honourable friend please meet with me to discuss the impact on pharmaceutical investment?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's an industry worth some £14 billion to our economy. I'm pleased to tell him that the industry has seen a 12-fold increase in equity financing in just the last decade. But I'd be very pleased to meet with him to discuss it further.
Rohobos.
Speaker, soaring rent costs are the biggest reason why my constituents in Bath struggle heavily. The average monthly rent in Bath and North East Somerset has risen by more than £200 in the past 3 years. What support will the government giving to people who are renting in the private sector?
Chancellor.
That is why we need to build more houses, and she will be reassured to know that we are building record numbers of houses, in fact in the last year more than in any single year under the previous Labour government.
Andrew Rosendale.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I'd like the Chancellor of the Exchequer to know that the high level of business rates is having a devastating effect on small and medium-sized businesses in historic market towns like Romford, which are large retail centres. Will he please, as a government that is business-friendly, look at ways to reducing the burden of business rates on local businesses in constituencies like mine?
Chancellor. Can I say what a pleasure it is to be asked a question by my honourable friend? I think the first time it's happened since he's been back. And to say there is no more formidable champion of Romford. And when he speaks about business rates, we have indeed been doing what we can to bring them down in every fiscal event.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps have been taken to specifically support pensioners in terms of knowing what benefits they could possibly be entitled to, understanding that 1.4 million people access pension credit, but a great many more are entitled to it?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman will know that this is an issue which is very close to my heart as a former pensions minister. We did a huge amount of work there in terms of increasing the uptake of pension credit. I know this is something that matters a lot to honourable members. Work is being done in everyone's constituency, and I know work is being done in his as well.
Jeremy Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Lifetime ISA is a very positive instrument, but I understand that under its terms there are circumstances under which savers not only lose the benefits of the ISA but also part of their capital investment. This doesn't seem right, and would the Minister please meet me to discuss it?
Minister.
I'm very happy to meet my right honourable friend to discuss the Lifetime ISA. The Lifetime ISA is a fantastic product brought on by this government to help young people get on the housing ladder, and I'm happy to meet with him to discuss ways in which we can make this more accessible for more people in more circumstances.
Point of order, Tulip Sadiq, is it relating to these questions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister, in his response to me, said, and I quote, "Any area that loses bank branches is entitled to get a banking hub." But I have numerous examples, Mr. Speaker, of towns that lost bank branches, applied for a banking hub, and then were rejected, and their application was rejected. So, Mr. Speaker, please could you advise me on how I can get some clarity on this, and whether what the Minister said about any area that loses bank branches...
If you want to, obviously we can't continue the debate. You've certainly put on record, and I don't think this will be the end. I do think you know how to carry on through the usual channels that I would expect to use, no doubt starting with the table office. Right. Debbie Abrams, is it on this?
Is on these questions. The Chancellor said to me in answer to my question that economic inequalities actually increased under the former Labour administration. Under the House of Commons Library publication last month, it's absolutely categorically not the case. Would he like to take the opportunity to correct the record?
The Chancellor will.
I think she may have misunderstood me, Mr. Speaker. What I said was that economic inequality had fallen since the last Labour government.
Right, let us move on to the urgent questions. We'll let the front bench clear first. Well